If I were to approach any normal person and ask them what their thoughts on Sonic the Hedgehog are, the response would almost always be the same.
Ew, 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 get away from me, gross, ew.
Sonic games have never been received particularly well, at least in the eyes of the critics, usually only garnering scores within the 60 to 70% range, and only very rarely reaching an 80% on Metacritic. Even the most popular recent mainline game, Sonic Frontiers, which is still widely praised by the fandom, received fairly average scores by most outlets. So what is it with the blue rat that continues to deter these general audiences? Clearly there's something. It's quite bizarre that the fandom and everyone else is consistently at odds when it comes to opinions. Is it the fast-paced gameplay? Is it how the games are structured? Is it how each game is presented? Is it the blue bastard himself?
Baldy nose hair!
I've determined there's only one viable way to truly find out. Human experimentation. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our test subject, my girlfriend. For the sake of privacy, let's call her... Now, has never played a Sonic game. In fact, she hardly has any experience with platformers at all. Sure, she's played other games before. She spent her fair share of time on Tears of the Kingdom and probably an unhealthy amount of time on Genshin Impact, but she's never been too exposed to anything like this. She's essentially a blank slate when it comes to the blue rat, which makes her the perfect test subject for this sort of experiment. She's got no bias towards or against any of these games, besides possibly anything I may have complained about in passing. Her opinions on each game will form completely from an unfiltered, raw experience. Now, before we begin, I think it'd be best if I explain how this little experiment will work. I've selected 4 Sonic games that I think are good introductory points for the series. Each game is from a different decade and represents its respective era well. I will play between 1 to 3 levels of each game, mostly depending on how long each takes, while I observe how she plays, reacts, and complains. Afterwards, she will give me her impressions of the game, and I will judge her either great or poor taste in video games. Now, without further ado, let's begin with the first of 4 games. And what better place to start than Sonic the Hedgehog 1? As the first Sonic game in the series, I thought it would be a great starting point for Ah's Suffering. It represents the classic formula of Sonic in its purest form, and lays the groundwork for what the following games would become. And of course, it's not without its bullshit, which is always fun to watch. For easy accessibility, I had her play the Sonic Origins Plus version, and gave her the chance to pick any character she wanted. She opted to play as Amy. As soon as the game loaded, Ah started experimenting with the controls. I'd say she got them down pretty quickly, but in all fairness, there's only one button input you can actually do. Still doing better than Denny.
What's the controls?
I will say, throughout her entire time with the game, which was about a good 20 minutes or so, she never figured out how to spin dash or, hell, even roll, at least not on purpose. The game doesn't tell you how to do either of these things, it sort of just expects you to figure it out on your own. So when it came to some of the obstacles that required either of these 2 moves, she came to a standstill for a bit before opting to go another, slower route to continue the stage. She had a thing going for a bit where she was adamant about collecting every single ring, which slowed her down a bit, and even caused her a death. I also noticed that she didn't seem to realize for most of her playthrough that rings were her life source. I think she saw them more so as collectibles rather than hits you can take, because more often than not, she wouldn't make an effort to recollect or go back and get more rings after taking a hit, which would often lead to her silly, unnecessary demise. That being said, she got through Act 1 fairly quickly after struggling with a loop for a bit, and moved on to Act 2. There was only one section in Act 2 where Ah really seemed to struggle, and even then her mistakes weren't agonizing to watch or anything. She messed up on the platforming section near the middle of the level because of, from what I could tell, her not being very adjusted to how fast the characters move. She slipped and fell into the spikes after almost every jump, which was slowed her down a significant amount. On her first attempt, she didn't know what to expect at all and completely missed the platforms altogether. I don't think this is entirely on her. There's no way she could have known what was coming without prior knowledge of the stage. Being able to fall in the cracks so easily seems a bit too punishing for the second level of the game. But then again, she needs to get good! Act 3 was where Ah really began to struggle. She said she was ready to murder someone while playing this stage. I was scared for my life. Overall, she seemed to be getting the controls down fairly well, although as mentioned earlier, she hadn't the slightest clue how to roll, so some otherwise simple obstacles ended up being dead ends for her. The thing that slowed her down the most, though, was ironically her impatience. This wretched bridge is one of the best examples of this. I cannot tell you how long she struggled with getting past this bit. More often than not, she'd get a little too ahead of herself and fail to wait for the spikes to spin, causing her to get hit or die, and since there's no rings beforehand and she didn't know to go back and get some, she'd repeat this cycle over and over again. Even if she did overcome this obstacle, there's another spike pit that almost always put her back to whence she came, be it due to not knowing it was there or being unable to wait for the platform to swing in her direction. Eventually, from what I can only assume was pure luck, skill, she made it through that section and moved on to the boss. Her entire playthrough has been building up to this moment. She's mastered running, jumping sometimes, avoiding bottomless pits and spiked bridges. Nothing can stand in her way. That's, she kept attacking the wrecking ball. The wrecking ball! Like, come on, it doesn't get much easier than this. At least she finally grasped the concept of rings. After an unusually long process of trial and error, finally figured out how to hit the boss. Maybe I should have found a better test subject. She eventually discovered a little method, a technique, if you will, to beat the boss in an easy manner. If you sit in the corner, the boss cannot hit you. Ladies and gentlemen, she's discovered the cheese technique. Using this technique, she was finally able to overcome the boss and secure her victory. That pretty much wraps up all the time I gave with Sonic 1. Overall, she did a pretty good job, better than I expected, but that's not to say there weren't any struggles she faced. She seemed to struggle to adapt to the controls, and a lot of the sections where she had to patiently wait went over her head. I don't think all of this is her fault either. The game doesn't exactly tell you how to play, it just throws you in and expects you to know. Sure, at the time of release, it was practically expected that you read the manual on the drive home, but that's a thing of the past, and that thought process hasn't aged well in the modern day. That, and the fact that bottomless pits and spike traps are thrown at you without a care in the world, which makes it a bit unfair to a player who's never seen the level before. All that being said, Sonic 1 was a good experience for but it's time to move on to the next game on the list. God damn! Sonic Adventure 2 released on the series' 10th anniversary to critical acclaim. Years later, it's fairly decisive. Rather than using the classic 2D formula seen in the first few games, Sonic Adventure 2 uses a newer 3D playstyle, now possible only with the power of the Sega Dreamcast. With it comes a plethora of fun and jank, which will be perfect for Oz's first experience with the 3D Sonic game. Also, for the sake of convenience, we're using an unmodded Steam port to play. I know this is objectively the worst way to play the game, but I'm not Nokai. I don't just have a Dreamcast or two sitting around. This is the best we've got. Throwing her right into the action with this one. Straight to City Escape we go, and she immediately starts crashing into innocence. That's my girlfriend! The street surfing section went fairly smoothly, all things considered. She struggled with steering a bit, but this only happens like one other time in the game, so I can't really hold it against her. As soon as she hit proper Sonic gameplay, she started experimenting with the basic controls. She actually figured out how to spin dash this time. Good work, However, she was reluctant to notice something very important to first-time players. Omochao. Omochao is a little robot dude scattered throughout the level that'll tell you how to play the game. Unfortunately, more often than not, he's tucked to the side a bit, so if you're running along the main path and not actively trying to hit him, odds are you won't. This definitely dampened Oz's experience as she didn't get the insight she would need to easily escape the city. And it's not really her fault either, she didn't know what he was, nor was she taught to look for him. Eventually, after a death that led to her restarting the stage, she failed to hit any checkpoints. I decided to intervene and tell her about Omochao. It was better than letting her figure it out on her own, and frankly, it saved us a lot of time that otherwise would have been spent struggling. Honestly, I think because of this, most of her time with the game went fairly smoothly. This footage was admittedly recorded a few months back, and I remember her struggling in some sections, like this homing attack above a pit, a whole lot more. Now, she did die 4 times before actually getting across, but that's besides the point. She did it eventually, and that's what matters. The rest of the level was fairly easy for slow, but easy. She had me a wee bit stressed watching her run away from the gun truck since she was down to 0 lives and at 1.0 rings, but she managed to pull through and to finish the stage with an astounding E rank. City Escape was the only level I had play. Like I said, she got through it pretty easily, but it took her damn near 13 minutes in total. I wasn't about to test her luck with the treasure hunting or mech stage. I did, however, let her mess around in the Chow Garden, as it's something I thought she'd get a kick out of. And that she did! She loved playing with the Chow and giving them food. At least for one of them. She picked favorites between the two hard. She almost threw one away, like who does that? I think my girlfriend might be evil. And that concludes Oz's time with Sonic Adventure 2. Not as long as her time with the first game, but not as great either. She definitely didn't struggle as much, but overall it seemed like she enjoyed the game less. I asked her why, and she mainly leaned towards her issue being the controls. She didn't specify too much, but I can imagine it's not like anything she's ever played before, so the adjustment must have been rough. Even with the Omochao hints, she still struggled a bit. So I can only imagine what it would have been like without my nudge in the right direction. Like I said though, she loved the Chow Garden and would stay there forever if given the opportunity. But sadly, we can't. So, on to the next game it is. Flash forwarding another 10 years, we have Sonic Generations. Generations is, to this day, critically acclaimed as one of, if not the best Sonic game to release thus far. This game once again takes on a different gameplay style compared to the previous two games, at least for the sections I will be playing. Instead of fully 3D levels featuring the spin dash and other adventure Sonic mechanics, Generations features the boost formula, where the player blasts through a mix of 3D and 2D levels at high speeds, while quickly platforming and defeating enemies. This is quite the deviation from the other two gameplay styles, so this might be a big adjustment for Ah. But will she find herself enjoying it more? Let's find out. Since Generations levels are fairly short, even for first time players, I'd let her have a go at the first two modern stages in the game, Green Hill and Chemical Plant, without any added skills, of course. Starting with Green Hill, we ran into our first hurdle in this game. Jumping. I'm honestly not sure how this was a challenge for her, since it's been one of the few consistent mechanics in every game, but she managed to get herself stuck in the pit near the beginning of the level and was unable to jump out. Instead of fully jumping, she was tapping the A button, which only results in a hop. She was at this for roughly a minute or so before she finally figured it out, and even then she still managed to fuck it up. And as if it couldn't get any more embarrassing, when she eventually did get out of the pit, she wound up dying to the second enemy she saw. Good job, Ah. She claimed that her poor performance was because of anxiety from being watched, but being completely honest, I don't really buy it. Following the section, she seemed to be doing fairly fine. She got a handle of the homing attack fairly quickly. I think it helped that she was forced to see the button inputs on the screen when the move was first acquired. Then Ah encountered the boost prompt. Now, she got it just fine in the section, but I don't think the information fully processed to her for a bit, as she hardly used it for the entire stage following this. Boost is a pretty vital mechanic for a good time in this game, so not using it definitely slowed her down and made her gameplay a bit sloppy. That being said, she played through the first 2D section fairly well and was able to platform her way through with relative ease. She immediately fucked up the rail section, and I don't know how. Good job, Ah. The next 2D section was pretty painful to watch. I don't know if all her game sense just left her body or she had crazy beginner's luck in the first 2D bit, but she played significantly worse this time around. She didn't boost, she was struggling with the slide, she was even struggling with the homing attack, the one ability I thought she had a good handle on at this point. I honestly think she hit about every obstacle she could in this section, which leaves me pretty impressed if I'm gonna be honest. Good job, Ah. The rest of the stage was pretty straightforward. She of course still failed to acknowledge the boost, but besides that she played pretty much as expected. For a while I was wondering why she ignored this vital mechanic, and while going through her footage, I think it finally hit me. Every other time a mechanic is needed to progress the stage, say for example the slide, it prompts the user on which button to press. Even the homing attack, while not telling you which button, still prompts you to use it. The boost, however, doesn't usually have this, so besides that one time near the beginning of the level, Ah had no visual indication to use this ability. I think that this caused her to think that she didn't need it, which I suppose in all fairness she really didn't. The level is entirely possible to beat without it, but this did slow her time down a ton. Before she started Chemical Plant, I gave her a friendly reminder about the boost, just so both of our lives would be less painful. She then proceeded to return my kindness with cardinal sin.
I fully missed all those coins.
Coins?
She got what she deserved. She did figure out the boost though. Good job, Ah. Chemical Plant went pretty smoothly. Somewhat. Okay, maybe she forgot how to quick step and had absolutely no game sense, but she's doing okay. She's definitely adapted fairly quickly from Green Hill. She's successfully performing all the basic platforming with at least some relative ease. Hell, she even got through the skydiving portion while boosting without hitting a single blob. That being said, her greatest challenge came right after. The introduction of the dreaded, the horrifying water section. Water sections have never been particularly good in Sonic games. Slowing down your movement is incredibly jarring for a character that's designed to go fast and be cool or whatever. Throwing this at a player who has little to no experience with this kind of game is essentially a death sentence. I noticed that she often found difficulty with timing her jumps underwater, which would repeatedly land her in situations where she'd get hit or stuck in positions that she probably wouldn't otherwise struggle with. The section near the middle of the second underwater portion was a pretty big hurdle for her. She got trapped under this block and smushed several times, and when she did get over it, she'd get knocked out by an enemy immediately after, resetting all her hard-earned progress. Eventually, this hurdle was conquered and she kept moving forward. Slowly. I really don't know what you're trying to do here, like jump! Final water section was a bit easier for all things considered. I think she was slowly getting adjusted to the weird physics. Some of the timing issues with her jumps were still there, and if the platforms were moving she would often struggle a little bit, but she didn't have any deaths in this portion, so that's an improvement. The rest of Chemical Plant was fairly straightforward. No struggles, no deaths, nothing particularly funny happened, so I ain't gonna talk about it. And with that, we conclude Ah's time with Sonic Generations. From what she told me, despite her struggles, she seemed to enjoy this game a lot more than she expected to. I think it definitely helped that the game took its time to actually introduce and teach mechanics in a more in-your-face kind of way, rather than the approach that Adventure 2 took, as well as the game just being a little more straightforward. But enough of all that, it's time to move on to Ah's final game, and the one that she, for better or worse, spent the most time in. Flashing forward 11 years this time, we find ourselves at the most recent mainline 3D game in the series, Sonic Frontiers. Once again, we're switching up the gameplay formula. This is a normal thing, get used to it. Frontiers is the first, and as of now, the only Sonic game to tackle the open zone formula. Basically, the main part of the game consists of exploring these giant open worlds that the player can run around in and complete tasks or whatever, with linear stage tucked away in these cyberspace portals hidden around. The game came out to fairly positive reviews from fans and critics alike, although it is heavily noted that it isn't without its flaws and can be very rough in a few areas. The controls in cyberspace levels and the visual design of open zones come to mind. Ah has played and loved a few games reminiscent of Frontiers, such as Breath of the Wild and Genshin. So, will she love it as much as those, or will the game's faults take away from her enjoyment? We shall see. Now, because I know she's a champ, I opted to put Ah on hard mode and high speed style. We don't have time to squabble around. Sonic Frontiers is a man's game, and my girlfriend is going to play it like a fucking man. I had her watch the first cutscenes because the story in this game is somewhat cool, and she proceeds to nitpick every little detail. Thank you, Ah. Straight to cyberspace. She's actually playing well. I mean, she's slipping around a bit here and there, but I can't blame her too much. The turning is pretty shit. But she seems like she's finally gotten the hang of this. Okay, yeah, walk off the platform. All in all, though, she played 1-1 far better than I thought she would. She wasn't bothered too much by the handling, picked up on everything, including the new homing attack and boost buttons, very quickly, and seemed to actually enjoy herself in this level, which honestly I wasn't expecting. Maybe it's because she's not entirely used to the standard controls of a boost Sonic game, so the sudden stiffness isn't too jarring for her. I don't really know, honestly, but I'm glad she had fun. She did say she liked the button mapping a lot better here though. It felt more natural to her to have the boost and jump easily accessible at the same time through the right trigger and A, rather than having to quickly switch back and forth between A and X with the same finger. I honestly agree with this, and I'm very glad it's slowly becoming the standard, as seen in Shadow Generations. As soon as Ah entered the open zone, her screen was immediately covered by a tutorial prompt, and then immediately after, another. She complained about this, of course, but honestly, this kind of in-your-face, forceful learning might have been her best friend in this game. But more on that later. She walked around a bit, solved the first puzzle, and immediately her mind went to,
This is giving some Breath of the Wild type shit. I'm not complaining though. Watch the open worldness be the reason why I like this game.
pop up again, ah! The next few minutes consisted of Ah wandering around some of the beginner area, messing around with the game's mechanics, and overall getting a feel of what to expect from the open zone, and it honestly seemed to be clicking with her. I mean, she wasn't really playing well, for the most part at all, but I could tell right away that she was having a lot more fun with this than she had with the previous 3 games. I think the nature of the open zone not being one that rushes the player to the next objective really did it for her. She was able to spend as much time as she needed to mess around with the platforming challenges and really understand what the game is all about. Carrying on to the first mini-boss, Ninja. I think we can all admit that Frontier's base combat ain't all that. It really just consists of spamming the same button and dodging. That being said, Ah died pretty early on into her first attempt with this guy. This was because she didn't actually read the tutorial prompt on how to dodge, so that's completely on her. Sorry, not sorry. She got her revenge the second time around though. Again, I could tell she was really liking the exploration aspect of the game. Even after completing one of the puzzles needed to progress, she went back and checked out stuff she hadn't seen yet. Also, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you walk into this area for the first time, this door is supposed to be closed, yes? It was wide open when Ah walked in. She didn't even have to complete the torch puzzle. This doesn't matter at all to her gameplay, I just thought this was very weird. Skipping forward a bit to the next cyberspace portal, and she didn't seem interested in playing it. This could have just been her being difficult with me since I told her going to it was the only way to progress the story, but I think she was genuinely more invested in exploring what the open zone had to offer. She messed around with the platforming challenges in the area for a few minutes, but after some urging, she reluctantly agreed to carry on with the game. After a rather quick and humiliating defeat from Tower, Ah was determined to get the combat figured out. She struggled a bit on her second attempt, but I could definitely tell she was a lot more zoned in, and she seemed pretty proud of herself after defeating the enemy. Cyberspace 1-2 went pretty smoothly. Only 5 overly embarrassing deaths. Not bad, Ah. She was a bit quiet during this part of the run, but she apologized for this and said that this was a sign that she was liking the game. After leaving cyberspace, she crossed the newly materialized bridge, climbed the mountain with a few minor setbacks, and collected the first emerald. I thought this would be a good stopping point for her first time with Frontiers, as this section signifies the end of the tutorial. However, she actually insisted on continuing on with the game for a while longer. For the video's sake, I'm going to stop here, but this is a very good indicator of how much she enjoyed her time with the game. The key thing I noticed about Frontiers that set it apart from any of the other games I played was how it handles introducing new concepts and abilities to the player. The other games didn't get in your face about tutorials and how to do certain button inputs. Most of the time, the tutorial blurbs briefly showed up at the top of the screen or needed to be activated by touching a Chow in the corner or something, and in Sonic 1's case, not had any at all, but Frontiers is really in your face about it. Pretty much every time something new happens, a text box appears, pausing the entire game for the player to read it. Sometimes it'll even take the player to a white space, where they have to perform a move before they can leave. Admittedly, I think this method breaks the pace of the game a bit. It takes you away a bit too much from where you want to actually be, but it worked really well in Ah's case, as it actually gave her hands-on experience with all her moves. Something that the game does that I actually do like and think is kind of genius is that they put white space tutorials in while loading levels. It keeps the players engaged and lets them freshen up their skills a bit. Other than that, Ah said that one of the biggest factors towards enjoying Frontiers was the open world aspect. She felt a lot more comfortable being able to play the game at a pace she wanted to. The design of the open world was also significantly less punishing, as falling off a platform or dying didn't set her back a significant amount, which generally kept her less discouraged while playing the game. At the beginning of the video, I asked the question, what about Sonic games towards the general audience? After rigorous testing and analysis, I think I've come up with a few answers. Number 1, they're too fast. These games aren't like a lot of other games out there. Most of them don't give the player time to adjust to the high-speed antics of Sonic the fucking Hedgehog. It's a go fast or get smashed world. They just aren't ready for it. Very frequently did Ah find herself slipping up just because she didn't have enough time to react to an incoming obstacle or trap. Sure, she could, in theory, slow down and take everything super carefully, but that just ain't the name of the game, is it? 2. They don't teach you the controls very well. The earlier games fall victim to this a lot more than the later ones, but all of them seem to struggle with it at least a little bit. For Sonic 1, it's a bit more excusable. That game is like 3 moves in general, but not explaining anything still kept Ah out of the loop for a lot of things that could have easily improved her run through. Sonic Adventure 2 is tutorial prompts, but most of them are out of the way and pretty easy to miss. I don't think Ah knew what the homing attack was until I told her, and that was well into the level. Generations and Frontiers are a lot better at telling the player what to do, but still have some faults. Notably, Gens rarely reminds you about the boost after the first time you use it. So, from what I've seen, I think Sonic games just need to try a bit harder in instructing the player on what to do. Number 3, they've got weird gimmicks and difficulty spikes. This kinda goes hand in hand with the first 2 a bit, but sometimes the game just throws shit at you that probably shouldn't be there so early on. Bottomless pits are what come to mind immediately. Having them somewhat prominently in the first level is a bit harsh for first time players. Water sections are also a pain and drastically decrease movement speed and agility, which can completely throw off first time players. Maybe saving some of these sections for later parts of the game could reduce struggle for some of the players and make them a wee bit more accessible to beginners. Could also just be a huge skill issue on Ah's part, but I'm not judging. Okay, I am a little. There's definitely a lot more small things I could bring up, but after spending hours going through her footage and watching her play, I believe these are the 3 biggest factors to why general audiences struggle picking up Sonic games. Now, that raises another question. Should you introduce Sonic to non-Sonic fans? To that I say, yes, absolutely. Recording this video and watching Ah play was a lot of fun for both of us. Even if she wasn't totally into the game she played, we both had a good bonding experience over this and got a lot of good laughs. So yeah, go ahead and introduce your girlfriend, boyfriend, sibling, mom, dog, whoever to Sonic the Hedgehog, even if it's forcefully. You'll probably have a good time that you could both share. Alright, I know you've been wondering. Sometime back I made a community post and a tweet asking you, the viewer, which game you thought Ah enjoyed most out of the 4 she played. Both polls were fairly similar, with Gens as the most popular guess and Sonic 1 as the least. Some of you left comments explaining your thinking, which I appreciate a lot. Some of you also left comments guessing games that weren't on the list, and some of you were just mean. I saved revealing her ranking until making this video, because spoilers or something. However, instead of revealing her list myself, I'll let her do it. Take it away, Ah.
Sonic Adventure 2 was honestly my least favorite. I'm not sorry. It's not because I had played horribly. Okay, maybe that might have been a slight factor, but I just wasn't a fan of the mechanics or how the level I played was laid out. I didn't know what I was doing, and I felt kinda bad that it took what felt like forever to just get through the level. The Chow Garden was easily the best part in my opinion, and I will die on that hill. Generations wasn't my favorite, but I didn't dislike it either, so I don't have much to say on it. I liked the pace, and I didn't care too much if I died, unless it were in the water sections. The gameplay overall felt easier, and I didn't feel horrible with how badly I played. The original game was fun, as it was simply running and dashing, and all I had to worry about was Max making fun of me if I died too many times. If I had a nickel for how many times I died, I don't know how many I'd have, but probably a lot. Bonus points that I got to play as Amy because that woman is badass. Frontiers was truly my favorite. The open world, being able to take my time, the tutorials that were constantly in my face. I loved almost all of it. Sure, it felt slow in the beginning, but that's how most games like this start, right? Open world games like Genshin and Breath of the Wild are my favorites. And that was what truly made Frontiers more enjoyable for me, since it wasn't just the main gameplay of running through linear stages.
So there you have it, all the Sonic games Ah has played so far ranked worst to best. To recap, she has Sonic Adventure 2 in last, please don't attack her, Sonic Generations in third, Sonic 1 in second, and Sonic Frontiers at the top. Apart from that, any final thoughts you'd like to add, Ah?
Pretty mid, not as good as Genshin Impact. Nah, but actually, I didn't dislike it as much as I thought I would. Except for Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games 2008, I never had much of an interest in Sonic games growing up. And I still don't, but I understand the hype a little better. Sure, I died a lot while playing, but I'm just a girl and I'm learning. I honestly won't go out of my way to play any of the games on my own, but maybe on a rare occasion I'll ask Max if I can play one or two on his computer.
On rare occasion, you say? Well, we shall see if the people demand your return. However, what I'm demanding right now is that you subscribe, follow me on Twitter, and watch more of my videos. Also, don't ask me to upload consistently, I think I'm incapable. Also, subscribe to the Dreamcast, I'm there a lot, you should watch that, yeah.